Who knows? Maybe this time it'll actually record the whole damn thing. So, this is attempt number 2 to record this video, because last time I ran out of memory card space. So, hi. Abolish landlords. Why should we abolish landlords? Why should you vote for it at Green Party Autumn Conference? This is what I want to talk about today. Who am I? My name's Alexander Salons. I'm the lead proposer of Abolish Landlords. This is my second motion to Green Party Autumn Conference. Hopefully the second successful one. The first one was £15 minimum wage. And I wanted to make this video to talk about the policy, to talk about why you should vote for it, why I think it's needed, both in terms of the wider debate on housing, and also in terms of the Green Party itself, and to talk about the political context as well. Why do we need this motion? Why is it important for us? So first question is, what is Abolish Landlords about? Fundamentally, abolishing landlords is about equality. It is about, who owns the housing and why. It's about, what housing are we building and why? Really, really simple questions which just don't get asked, don't get talked about in the debate on housing. It is about, I think it's about questioning the fundamental principles of the economy. Why does this thing exist? Why, like looking at it in the most autistic fashion possible and going, well, why? But why does this exist? Why does private landlordism exist? What is it for? What does it produce? What interests does it serve? And again, this stuff just doesn't get talked about in wider political debate. It just doesn't. And I think that is one of the things that makes the Green Party great, is that we talk about this kind of stuff. And I think we need to talk about it more, and I think we need to talk about it more publicly. And I think it needs to not just go into the environment, but also into things that affect the cost of living, like housing. And so kind of the context of this is that we've just gotten a new leader in Zach Polanski, whose fundamental pitch to the Green Party was about how we need to talk about more than just the climate. We need to talk about the cost of living. We need to talk about people's material concerns. And this is, I think, exactly what he was talking about. We need to talk about housing, and we need to talk about the things that are actually going to make a difference in people's lives, and we need to talk about them in a way that is going to grab their attention. Okay, and that's not just talking about, supply and demand, because that's all the current debate is. We need to be talking about these material concerns, and we're doing this in a place where in the 2024 general election we got almost 40 second places, mostly against Labour. A huge amount of those are in London, a very renter-heavy city, and the rest of them are in places like Manchester, Leeds, Liverpool, Brighton and Hove, Bristol, all cities with quite a few renters in them. And so we need to talk to those people. We need to talk to their interests. And that is what this motion is about. So then we come to the question of, why do we need to abolish landlords? And, you look at the current debate on housing. The current debate on housing is pretty simple. It is turning around to you and speaking to you like you're a child and going, but this is economics 101. Okay? If there is not enough supply to meet the demand, then the cost of housing will go up. As though housing were Labubus, as though I could, just crank out. I could make a contract with a new factory overnight. I could crank up Labubus, and suddenly, the price would plummet. Which housing is not Labubus. Okay, it's not. You don't need a Labubu to live, to survive. You need housing. You need shelter. You need stability in your life in order to survive, in order to live a happy and healthy life. Okay, that is why housing is different, because you don't have a choice. Okay, I don't have the resources to just up and move over to a cheaper city simply because, unfortunately the landlords have you over a barrel in that sense. And so we look at the housing crisis, It is fundamentally a crisis of affordability, the price of housing, which is mostly in the price of land. And so before I talk to the meat of like why we need to abolish landlords, I want to go back. I want to kind of cast back to the 70s, okay, where conservatives and people inside of Labour, the Fabians, were talking about the death of the private landlord. Okay, multiple publications, like people like in the Times, talking about the death of the private landlord, because the post-war consensus of building council housing, having rent controls, which we had since just after World War One, had decreased landlord profits to the point that people had left the sector. And remember that, because that will come in handy, pretty soon. And then what happened? The price of housing went down. People had access to, safe, affordable, quality public housing. And then Thatcher came in, and she, almost single-handedly resurrected the private landlord. She resurrected it as a quote unquote profession, an industry. She revitalized it, and she did it quite simply by deregulating it. Okay, so she got rid of rent controls. She introduced the assured short hold tenancy, and what that does is essentially allows the landlord power. It rebalances the power from tenant to landlord. Okay, if the landlord does not like you, if you are complaining about leaks, the landlord can get rid of you through a Section 21. They don't have to say that's why it is, but that's what they're going to do. Okay, if the rents aren't controlled, the landlord can raise the rents, and if you don't like it, the landlord can get rid of you and replace you with another tenant. And there is always another tenant to replace you after that. You know that, and I know that, and that is, that's just common knowledge. There is always another tenant, someone else who's going to pay for that housing in whatever condition it happens to come in, because the landlord must get profit. And at the same time as this, she also introduced right to buy, which is essentially taking the plug out of the bath that is the supply of council housing. Okay, she took a publicly owned asset, a public good, a service for the public in the form of housing, and she started the long, slow process of privatizing it. And that is what right to buy is. It is the privatizing of public housing. And so at the same time, as deregulating landlords, she fundamentally gutted the only competition to private landlords. Because in the current debate, the idea of private landlords, people go, oh no, but there's competition. There's competition in the market. No, you don't have to go for this private landlord. You could go for that private landlord. At the same time as when the rents go up, you ask your private landlord, and what do they tell you? They say, oh no, I'm just putting it at market rent. That's where the market is. When the market is made up of private landlords. Okay? One landlord goes, oh, I can rent a one-bed flat for 1,800 quid. And so 3 more landlords go, well, he's charging 1,800 and his tenant's paying that. Therefore, I can charge that. And there is no other significant force in the housing market that is providing alternative housing for a cheaper price. Okay? Because having reduced the supply in council housing, Thatcher reduced your options of where to go, because you cannot easily turn around to the council and go, I need a house, because they go, we don't have the supply. Why? Because right to buy means they can't, they have no incentive to build new houses. They can't build new houses knowing that it's going to be privatized in 5 or 10 years, because then they won't have the, at a discount, may I add, because then they won't have the money to keep up new ones. They won't have the money to build new ones. And so it's a perfect storm. It's a perfect storm to build this, housing crisis, which did not come out of nowhere. It is fundamentally, it's the end stage of Thatcherism, of privatization of public housing. And so How will this motion change that? Like, what are the policies in it, and why? What are the policies in it, and how are they going to work? Private landlordism exists because of profit. Landlords are told by society that they deserve a profit, that no matter what, they will get a profit. It's not like there's adverts on TVs. The value of your investment may go down as well as up. No. The landlord's investment will only go up. They will only ever reap profits. They will never take losses. Okay? Because that is the promise that they were given by society, by Thatcher's ghost. And so the way to abolish landlords, it's not going to be the case of writing the Landlord Abolition Act. It will not be an overnight thing. And indeed, the motion says it's an effective abolition. What it will mean is a slow, long process of decreasing the profits of landlords, re-regulating the landlords, and taking them out of the housing market as a significant force and reducing them to near zero. It will not, it will not outlaw private landlordism. It will make it fundamentally an unattractive option to invest your money. And hopefully those people then choose to invest their money on fundamentally productive things like stocks and shares, companies that produce things. What a wild idea. The motion does this in quite a simple way. I should probably bring the motion up. The motion does this in quite a simple way. Step one is introducing rent controls and abolishing right to buy. Okay. Rent controls is very much here and now policy. Okay. It is taking control of the price of an essential good, of an essential need of the populace, and controlling the price. Because if you don't, if you, the government, don't control the price, no one else will. Okay, the landlords will not. They will go crazy, as they have been. Okay, and you need to bring down the cost of rents here and now. Abolishing right to buy is fundamentally getting rid of the disincentive of councils to build. You are stopping the supply of council housing going down, meaning that it can start to gradually tick back up. The second step is taxing landlords, okay, with a land value tax, which is a long time Green Party policy. We've had it for quite a few years, but it does need to be levied on landlords. And the only way that's going to happen is if you control the rents, which is why putting in rent controls first is so important. Also, national insurance on private rents, making sure there are business rates on Airbnbs and short lets, and double taxation on empty properties. Okay, making sure that unused properties are brought back into use or sold so that someone can use them. National insurance on private rents is currently being discussed. It's been discussed as a possibility in the new budget. Without rent controls, that will just go to the tenant. Rent controls is so incredibly important. Something that I didn't put in here in 2025, I did in 2024, was abolishing Section 21, and that's because it was included in the Renters' Rights Bill. Labour still hasn't done that, and honestly, I don't know whether I've made a mistake by not getting us to call for it again. That is still policy, by the way, but it just won't be in this motion. I don't know. Yeah, that may have been a mistake of mine. The third step is removing finance for landlords with the end of buy-to-let mortgages. Okay, they cannot, you cannot allow landlords to get cheap finance in order to buy more properties in order to increase wealth inequality. Ending buy-to-let mortgages is incredibly important. The fourth step is providing finance to councils. Okay, we need to make sure that councils have the ability to access capital in the same way that landlords did with buy-to-let mortgages, but they need the ability, councils need the ability to access capital to build new council housing. Okay, this is providing the competition to reduce rents. Okay, to create a new generation of council housing. Also making sure that councils have the right to buy private landlords' properties when they sell. So when a private landlord sells a property, the council gets first right of refusal. If the landlord isn't keeping their house up to scratch, if they're not maintaining it, if they're not bringing it up to environmental regulations, the council gets the right to buy it. Okay, and that's really important. Increasing the supply of council housing, decreasing the number of landlords in the market. Okay, but not decreasing the number of rental properties, so people have options. And then the fifth step, which I added, is the establishment of a state-owned housing manufacturer. And having talked to a couple of friends who are councillors, they see the value in this. I really think it's a valuable policy, making sure that when councils are building new council houses, there is a specialised developer for them to go to that is skilled and trained and with a mandate to mass build council housing, as well as to actually do the research and development into house building techniques, into architecture and design. Okay, all the things that we need in order to build a new generation of council housing. And when I say council housing, I grew up in Berkshire. I grew up around the corner from Bracknell, a place with a lot of council housing, one of the new towns. Growing up, council housing was not something that was desirable. It was not something to be well thought of, okay, in the common psyche. And we need to change that. We need to turn around and change that. We need to look at places like Vienna, where council housing, it's something you can pass on to your kids. It's something desirable. It is, compared to some of the housing around here, it's bloody luxury. You've got a pool, you've got a gym, you've got a doctor, you've got a nursery, all in the same complex. Honestly, I want to live there. And so all of this is designed to lead to landlords exiting the market in an orderly fashion, let's say, and to the construction of a new generation of council housing. Okay, building up the conditions where rents are controlled. Hopefully they will fall. Okay, that is what we want to see. They will fall, and hopefully the price of housing generally will fall. Okay, that is one of the key aims of a land value tax, is to see the price of land fall. Okay, and making sure that housing fundamentally is for people and not for profit. So something I've been asked is why write this motion? A key thing to remember here is that a lot of this policy has been policy already. It's already policy. It's already on the, part of it was in our manifesto, part of it was in our long-term policy, the PFSS. But if you go out and talk to people, they will not talk about our housing policies. Okay, they will talk about our environmental policies, our climate change. They love us on the environment. They will not talk about our housing policies, and this is key. We need an offer on housing, and we need something that is going to excite people and that is going to drive debate. And so that's why me and my friend Martin, we wrote this motion, is to bring a new narrative, okay, redefine the narrative on housing to one away from simply supply and demand and giving a bunch of money to private developers and boosting their profits, one away from endless growth, because honestly, if you go down the supply and demand route, you're basically just going to pave the whole country, okay, rather than actually dealing with the fundamental broken aspects of the housing market. And yet bringing a new populist narrative to housing, one that the Green Party owns and controls. That's why I wrote the motion with Martin, and that's why I brought it again this year in 2025. So now we come to this conference. The motion has been listed as E04. Many of the sharp-eyed among you will go, what? E04? I thought it was E03. And that is because the Standing Orders Committee forgot that there was a motion which was E20, and is now E03, which is about trans and non-binary identities. It was supposed to get the modifier in the prioritisation ballot. It did not, because apparently they didn't check, and that's been fixed. That does mean it is listed for fast tracking. It may not get fast tracking, at which point it will be heard in full. And that will make it unlikely that we will hear abolish landlords in 2025, and that will push it back to 2026. It is disappointing. It does mean that I've just ordered a bunch of leaflets and posters that have the wrong number on them. I am not happy about that. But yeah, regardless of what happens, I want to have a conversation about this. I want to talk about this with people, the people who attend conference. I want to talk about this with Green Party members. I want to start a conversation about this more widely. The need to abolish landlords, the need to have a strong narrative on housing. And so, what can you do to help? Turn up to conference is the first big thing. If you're not attending conference, please do try, if you possibly can. If you cannot, assign your proxies. If you cannot attend conference, assign your proxies to a friend who is. You can specify that they, have to, they can only vote on certain motions. Talk to them about it. Try and convince them. If you are attending conference, I will have leaflets to hand out to your friends, to random people attending conference. And more than that, just, talk to your friends, talk to your Green Party friends, talk to your family, talk to them about landlordism and why it might not be the best thing to have people profiting off of basic human needs. The Green Party has a bunch of policies about the kind of the basics of human life. We want to renationalize the rail, the buses, the water, the energy, the mail, all sorts of public utilities that were privatized. But we don't really talk about housing in quite the same way, because it was privatized among a ridiculous amount of people. There are almost 2.5 million landlords in the UK, more employees, more than there are employees in the NHS. And that, that has to change. We need to talk about housing in the same way. We need to talk about it as a fundamental public good, a public service for people, a public utility that we need to regain ownership of. That's why I brought the motion. I really hope to see you all at Autumn Conference. Just under 2 weeks away. If you see me, say hi. Happy to talk to you about it. And I think I've come to the end of this video. If you want to see me talk more about Green Party stuff, pop a comment, was it down below. If you're coming to Autumn Conference, let me know. I'll have some leaflets for you. And see you there. Let's turn this off.